channel. My name is Stacey Flowers and I am a student of Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University and on a journey to become 100% debt-free. I'm currently on baby step number 1 to save $500, and that is because my income is under $20,000 a year. I currently work part-time, earning anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 a month. I also just recently opened my company quarter time and it is becoming profitable. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how I was able to release the emotion of guilt, which was dramatically impacting my budget. So if you're interested in learning how I was able to release the emotion guilt, what came up, please keep watching. So hopefully by now you guys will have watched my video on how I was able to release resentment. Just for those of you who have not seen that video, I'm going to recap the process for doing the emotional work for releasing any sort of emotion that's driving a behavior in your life that you don't want, especially as it relates to money. The process is to, number 1, start out with a quick prayer. It can be very, very brief. Pray for the strength to handle the truths that are going to come up. Number 2, you want to write down a couple of pieces of gratitude. The gratitude is so important because you want to be able to maintain your perspective as you're moving through all of the stories and truths and emotions that are going to surface as you are doing this emotional work. The third thing that you want to do is take a deep breath and ask yourself the question, how is this serving me? The assumption that we're running with here is that you are not doing this behavior that's detrimental to you because you think that it's detrimental. There's some way that this is serving you. What are the benefits? What do you gain from doing this particular thing or having this particular emotion in my case? The fourth thing is you want to journal what comes up. So you'll have a response and then you'll say, okay, why? And then you'll have another response and you'll say, okay, why? And you'll say why until you have an emotional release. The emotional release is important because that is the root of the issue that you are currently facing. The next thing that you want to do is you want to process as much of that alone as you can. You've already acknowledged it, you've accepted it, and it's the processing part. If you can process it alone, that's amazing. But if you cannot, I highly recommend that you process any sort of emotional work or things that surface that become overwhelming or difficult. And if you guys watched my previous video where I was releasing a resentment, I talked a lot about how I had to actually go to therapy to process a really big chunk of that because that resentment was connected to some grief that I had about my sister dying. And so if you need support and you don't already have a therapist, a really, really great, incredible resource that I've partnered with is a company called BetterHelp, and it provides you with a licensed therapist in about 30 minutes after signing up, and you are able to start working with a therapist right from your phone. So it's super exciting. All the information for BetterHelp will be linked below. So once you've acknowledged it either alone or with a therapist and you've really just been able to connect to it and clarify the root issue, the last and final step is to do a little bit of tapping, and tapping is short for emotional freedom technique. Emotional freedom technique allows you to be able to release the residual emotions that may be stored in any parts of your body physically as a pain, or just also release some of the mental and emotional blocks that still would be hanging around. And that is the process. So now what I really want to talk to you guys about in this video was how I was able to release guilt and what came up when I was releasing guilt. So obviously I did my quick prayer, I did my few pieces of gratitude, and then guilt was the emotion that came up after resentment. And my first question, why do you feel guilty? Why do you need to feel guilty? And the thing that came up is that I feel bad when I'm happy and other people are miserable. And so remember in my video I talked about how I had actually confused guilt and shame. Guilt is I have done something bad. Shame is I am bad. And so I was feeling very guilty. So then when I said, okay, well, why do you feel guilty, or how does guilt serve you? The thing that came up is that I feel when I'm happy and other people are miserable, I feel really bad. And then I was like, okay, well, why do you feel bad when you're happy and other people are miserable? And then what came up is this memory of me being selected to go to summer camp. And so what you guys will find is a lot of this stuff is going to be rooted in childhood because it's just how emotions work. Anywho, when I was a kid, I got selected to participate in a summer camp program, and it was essentially a summer camp program for smart kids. And I remember going to the camp, and I was gone all day, and because I was at this camp, I had to pack my lunch. And so I didn't have to, but my mom packed my lunch. We had to take a lunch with us, and I remember having like different food than my sisters and stuff. And I remember like, you know, being away from them and like being at the summer camp. And I remember like going to the summer camp and having a blast with all my friends. And I have one sister who is like, we're stair-step. She's literally like 1 year older than me. And so growing up, she was more like my best friend than she was my sister. And we were sort of almost raised as if we were twins, just because we were so close in age. And so we literally did everything together. And so this memory of me going to summer camp and being separated from her, but then also getting like a separate lunch, was like very vivid in my mind. And so I remember going back home and talking to my sister about it. And I remember when I was telling her about it, I don't really remember what her reaction was. She probably had a normal child reaction of like, wow, sister, that's what you got to do. But for whatever her reaction was, like, I internalized it in a way where I started to feel bad that like I had this experience that was so different than my sister. And wanting things to feel the same, and then me going to my mom and being like, oh, you know, I talked to my sister, or I talked to Steph, and you know, she can't go, and you know, blah blah blah. And I was like sad about it. And my mom was like, well, you guys are both playing all day. Like, the only difference is that you're getting a lunch, I pack your lunch, and you know, Steph eats here at the house. And I'm like, yeah, but you know, blah blah blah. I'm like sad about it. My mom was like, yeah, the only difference is that you're like, the only difference, Stephanie's having fun too. Like, you're having fun, Stephanie's having fun. The only difference is that you're getting something to eat. And so, or you're getting your lunch pack. And so then I was like, okay. And so then I wrote down like, all right, what did I write down? So then I remember that whole like conversation with my mom. And then for some reason that makes me feel really bad too, because I'm like, oh, why am I eating different than what my sisters are eating? And so then in my mind, that makes the link between like me eating to like emotionally, not all the way, but a little bit of emotional eating. And so then I'm like, I wonder why eating a little bit more makes me feel less guilty. And so then I was like, well, why does eating make you feel less guilty? And then I was like, because I was sick as a kid, and that was my punishment for having so much fun. And then I was like, that was your punishment for having so much fun? So like, you know, I just wrote that down. And then I said, okay, well, why did you need to punish yourself? And then I said, because I was having too much fun. And I'm like, why is it such a bad thing that you were, you know, having so much fun? So then I wrote, you know, why is too much fun a bad thing? And then I wrote, because somebody can get hurt. And then it's like, well, who can get hurt when you're having fun? And then I put my sisters, we were all playing, and then she disappeared. And so what happened at that point is then I was able to connect that memory to the memory, again, back to my sister dying and that trauma. And so what happened is my sister died in a fire. We were at my grandma's house, and we were all playing, me, my sisters, and my cousins, and we were like all playing that day. And then then my cousin was playing with matches, and he like lit a match, and the story goes that he dropped it accidentally into like the vent or whatever. And so the house caught on fire from like the inside, if that makes sense. First, like, it caught on fire from the inside. And so my last memory of like me and my little sister is like, or my sister who passed away, is like we're playing, and then she disappeared. And so there was a little bit of a connection through trauma of like, oh, when you play, like when you're having a really good time, bad things will sort of happen. And so once that connection was made, there was a little bit of an emotional release. So there's this like traumatic link of like having fun, my sister, and like that sort of linked. But like as I'm jotting things down, I'm like, you know, this is straying away from the original narrative of like, well, food, you get a different lunch, etc. So then to sort of bring it back, I say, okay, well, why does nourishment make you feel relieved from being bad? Because I was wanting to reconnect back to like the idea of like playing without my sister's summer camp, my lunchbox, and all that other stuff. And so I said, because I really want to be healthy, and to be healthy you have to eat and take your vitamins. And then I say, okay, well, no, I really want to be healthy. I say, because I really want to be healthy, and to be healthy you have to eat. And so then I say, well, why do you have to eat? And I said, because if you don't eat, then you'll die. And then I say, okay, do you feel like you're dying when something bad happens, you know? And so then I say, you know, not right away, but I feel like I'll soon die. And then I'm like, okay, so, and these were some very huge leaps. And I think the reason that these leaps were made this way is because once I released resentment and did my grief work, it was easier for me to just go wherever my next thought was taking me. And so then, I said not right away, but I feel like I'll die soon. And then I just asked myself, okay, well, what did you do wrong? And then my response was, I didn't die. And so then that's when I had another emotional release. And that was actually something, and it wasn't as severe as the resentment relief, but it was a pretty intense one. But that was something that I had worked on in therapy before, was like this feeling of like, when my sister died, I didn't die, and all of these like bad things happened. And when you're a kid, like, you're self-centered and everything is about you. And so I sort of made up in my mind that I should have died instead of my sister, because my mom was sad, my dad was sad, and I lost my older sisters. And so I sort of like made up in my mind that if I had died, then everything would have been fine. And so this is resurfacing this thought of like, well, I should have been the one to die. That's like resurfacing, and it's coming back in this like guilty feeling of feeling like I'm bad. And so like the thing that I did wrong was didn't die. And so then I'm carrying on with the emotional work, and then I say, guilt makes me feel like death is imminent. So anytime I feel guilty, anytime I feel like I've done something bad, because my ultimate bad thing that I had done is I didn't die, right? Anytime I feel guilty about anything, I feel like death is imminent. And so what I'm trying to push away is this idea of death. And so then I say I compulsively eat because I don't want to die. And so then that then brings me back to how, like, when I'm overwhelmed emotionally, I will eat. And it's because truly I don't want to die, but I'm feeling the imminence of death. And so it's creating this idea of like eating is how you survive, and you need to survive so you don't die. And so it's like around and around. And so then I, ask myself the final question, well, how does guilt serve you? And so then I say, it keeps me alive. And so then I go into the, is that true? And obviously that's not true, right? Like, I don't need to feel guilty in order to feel bad enough to eat. I need to just eat healthy, the way that I'm doing, right? And so it makes more sense if you look at it from how was guilt impacting my budget. Guilt was impacting my budget because every time I felt guilty, every time I felt like I had done something bad, I would just eat or overeat. So when I moved into a new apartment, I felt like I'd done something bad because I loved my apartment, so I ate those feelings away. First video that I did when I was sharing my budget, and I talked about how I blew my budget back in October, me and my son, we were on a trip in New Orleans, and I felt bad that we were able to be on this trip in New Orleans and I hadn't worked. And so anytime I feel bad, even if it's not associated with my money, and the bad feeling is coming from that original place of feeling guilty, then I eat to numb the feelings of guilt. And the feeling that I'm really trying to get away from and I'm really trying to escape is death. Now, obviously, this is not as extreme as it could be, and this is not as compulsive as it could be, because for the most part, I maintain really, really good nutrition. But it is helping me to realize that, me going out to eat, knowing that I'm trying to stick to my budget, or even me having a very constricted budget, a lot of it is connected to these overwhelming feelings of guilt and this overwhelming feeling of feeling like I've done something bad. And the something bad, one is I lived, that's, I didn't die, that's the root core of something bad. But the other more lighter something bad thing that I did is I had fun before my sister passed away. So then I asked myself, are you willing to release the need for guilt? And I said, absolutely. And then, what will you need to do? A willingness to take care of myself so that I can stay alive and just release the need for guilt. And so through the emotional freedom technique, I just tapped on it. And as I was tapping on it, I had another big, massive emotional release, because I realized that, like, the idea of, you're bad because you didn't die, you're bad because you get to have special experiences, you're bad because when you have fun, you lose your siblings, like the connection of like that root overall, like I'm a bad person for surviving, like I felt myself releasing that. And I think it was easier for me to do that through emotional freedom technique because of how much work I had already done in therapy for it, which is like, even as I'm sharing this now, you can see there's not as many tears with this one, because again, I worked on the feeling of I am bad for surviving my sister's death. I had already previously worked on this in therapy. And so now the emotions that are surfacing are more residual than they are like core, unresolved, go back to the beginning and figure this out. And so I was super, super grateful for having previously done that work and being able to bring it into this work to be able to release that, because now that I don't feel guilty, like, and I don't need to feel guilty in order to eat, it's like, no, I'm just gonna eat what I want to eat. And even as that relates to my budget, I'm just like, and it's funny because even if you think about like my previous videos where I'm like, yeah, I like textures and I like flavors and I like, it's like, I don't just want to say that I like food. like I just like food and adore food, like, and not from like a weird relationship, but just like, I just think it's amazing. And so releasing the guilt freed me to just enjoy my food. It's just funny because it's like, you can't get away from who you are, right? Like, I totally adore food, but so long as food was pushed behind this emotion of like guilt and only needed for survival, like I wasn't gonna allow myself to fully enjoy it in a way that, you know, was healthy for me physically, but also healthy for me financially, right? Because it's like, you could just increase your grocery budget and enjoy some of those vegetables or seasonings that you want or meats that you want, instead of going to the, you know, like blowing your budget and like, you know, eating out. Like, so it's been really interesting over these last couple of weeks just to see how releasing the need for guilt and using guilt as a trigger to like save myself, if you will, like releasing the need for that. Food is not just for survival. Like, I enjoy food for the enjoyment of food, and just leaning into that and letting myself do that, I think will prevent me from going over budget in a category where I should just prioritize it, right? Like, that's the thing. It's like all of these emotions were preventing me from prioritizing things that were actually important to me. So how this is going to impact my budget, primarily as it relates to guilt, you know, me releasing the need to survive based on guilt, is that I just foresee that I won't keep blowing my budget when it comes to food or comforting myself, because anything that I did to comfort myself or to air quotes survive, I won't feel the need for that, because I'll actually just prioritize it on the front end. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing to be able to eat on a conservative amount, but it's also a wonderful, beautiful thing to be able to just enjoy the food that you want to enjoy. So I'm really excited to see how that is going to impact my budget moving forward. So you guys know I deeply appreciate you all for supporting my work. I could not be doing this work or have made it this far without your loving, amazing, incredible, awe-inspiring support, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you for supporting my work, and I look forward to hearing about how you have been able to release the emotions that are blocking you from your financial freedom in the comments below. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye.